The bodies of Nadab and Abihu are still warm when the command comes down. Two priests, the eldest sons of Aaron, struck dead on the dirt floor of the Sinai tabernacle by a sudden, consuming fire. They brought strange fire to the altar, and a flash of localized divinity burned them from the inside out. Their father is not permitted to weep. He is only permitted to listen. Picture it. The smell of ozone and burnt linen is still hanging in the desert air. And in the immediate aftermath of this trauma, the Lord speaks to Moses. He does not offer comfort. He issues a perimeter warning. The holiest space on earth is suddenly framed, not as a place of peaceful communion, but as an active, lethal blast zone. The mystery of the veil begins here, anchored in a threat. Why is the commanded presence of God treated as a fatal collision where one wrong step means dying in the dark? Leviticus chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, in the King James Version. And the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they offered before the Lord, and died. And the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil, before the mercy seat which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. Stop right there. That he die not. Read that again. God is not inviting Aaron in. He is telling him how to survive the entry. There is a heavy, woven curtain dividing the tent, and behind it sits a geography so violently holy that a human body will unmake itself if it crosses the threshold unprotected. The veil was not a flimsy sheet of fabric. Ancient tradition tells us it was a handbreadth thick, woven from 72 twisted cords, so heavy it took hundreds of priests to move it. It was a physical wall, an architectural quarantine, keeping the localized presence of Yahweh in, keeping contaminated humanity out. See the scene. The Israelite camp is massive, sprawling under the shadow of the mountain, but all the tension of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, compresses down to this single, suffocating room. To understand the sheer terror of this mandate, we have to look outside the canon to the Mishnah, specifically Tractate Yoma. And Tractate Yoma reveals that they did not treat the high priest's entry as a triumphant parade. They treated it as a man walking to his own execution, hoping for a last-minute pardon. The room behind the veil had no windows, no lampstand. It was a perfect, absolute blackness. And the priest's only defense was what he carried in his hand, a golden censer of burning coals, not a symbol of prayer, but a physical tool of survival. A smoke generator meant to blind the eyes of a mortal man before he looked at something that would stop his heart. A man stripped of his pride, walking into the dark with a handful of fire. But before he can even approach that curtain, the ancient records tell us the camp had to break him down, isolating him from everything he loved. What happens to a man's mind when he is locked away for 7 days to prepare for his own possible death? 7 days before the 10th of Tishri, a detail of priests arrives at the high priest's home to take him away. He is removed from his family. He is separated from his own wife. They escort him to a stone room, inside the temple compound called the Chamber of the Palhedron. Picture it, a man sitting in total isolation, watching the sun rise and set, knowing exactly what awaits him at the end of the week. I offer Tractate Yoma as one tradition's record, the institutional memory of a priesthood terrified of a single mistake. But it shows us the psychological weight of the biblical command. Human impurity is common, and the space behind the heavy curtain does not tolerate the common. If his wife were to inadvertently pass impurity to him, the defilement would attach to his flesh, and the veil would kill him for it. He is quarantined, because when the day arrives, he will face the fire entirely without backup. The King James records the absolute isolation of this geography in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 17. And there shall be no man in the tabernacle of the congregation when he goeth in to make an atonement in the holy place, until he come out and have made an atonement for himself and for his household and for all the congregation of Israel. Read that again. No man in the tabernacle. If the high priest drops dead behind the veil, no one is permitted to cross the threshold to retrieve his body. He is the single point of failure for an entire nation. The Mishnah records that on the eve of Yom Kippur, the tension fractures into panic. The elders of the priesthood circle him. They refuse to let him sleep. They force him to pace the cold stone floors through the darkest watches of the night. When his eyes close, they snap their fingers in his face. They read aloud to him from the heavy, suffering chapters of Job and Ezra. Watch what the text does. It reveals a terror of the subconscious. If the high priest sleeps, he might dream. If he dreams, his body might betray him with an impurity of the flesh just hours before he must stand before the localized presence of Yahweh. A biological misstep meant a burial. So he stays awake. He rehearses the physical movements of the ritual over and over in his exhausted mind. He must know exactly how to hold the golden censer of burning coals. He must know exactly how to scoop the incense without spilling a single grain. He will be operating in absolute blackness, surrounded by an atmosphere of death, and muscle memory is his only map. Dawn breaks over the mountain. The sleepless, exhausted man is led to a ritual bath. But before he takes up the fire and the blood, the camp must strip him of everything that makes him glorious. When the high priest steps out of the water, the gold and jewels of his office are gone, and what they hand him instead is chilling. What does a man wear when he is walking into a room where he fully expects to die? The water of the ritual bath is cold against his skin as the sun breaks over the eastern wall. The high priest steps out, dripping, trembling from the sleepless night. Every other day of the year, his attendants would dress him in the glory of his office, the golden ephod, the breastplate set with 12 precious stones, the deep blue robe fringed with golden bells, that ring with every step to announce his life to the camp. Not today. Picture it. The gold is locked away. The jewels are hidden. The bells are silenced. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 4. In the King James, he shall put on the holy linen coat, and he shall have the linen breeches upon his flesh, and shall be girded with a linen girdle, and with the linen mitre shall he be attired. These are holy garments. Therefore shall he wash his flesh in water, and so put them on. Stop right there. 4 garments: coat, breeches, girdle, mitre, all of them made of the exact same material. Turn the English back to the Hebrew. The word repeated 4 times in this single verse is bad. It means plain, unadorned, white linen. This is not the richly embroidered fabric of the tabernacle curtains, woven with blue, purple, and scarlet threads. It is stripped, flat, absolute white. Watch what the text does. It is forcing a visual reversal. The man who represents all of Israel is commanded to take off his glory and wrap himself in the exact material ancient Israel used to wrap the dead. He is wearing a burial shroud. Sit with that. To enter the holiest geography on earth, you do not bring your status. You do not bring your noise. The golden bells of Exodus 28, the ones that rang so the congregation knew he was surviving the sanctuary, are completely absent. He is walking into the danger zone in absolute, terrifying silence. The people waiting outside in the courtyard will hear nothing. If he drops dead behind the curtain, they will only know by the endless, agonizing quiet. I offer this as the deliberate, visual architecture of the Torah, a shadow play of life and death. The high priest is acting out his own funeral before he ever approaches the threshold. He is stepping into the role of a corpse. a man who has already surrendered his right to draw breath. Same man, same desert, completely different identity. He is no longer the kingly intercessor. He is a ghost walking toward a fire. The attendants hand him the physical tools he needs for the breach. In his right hand, a golden censer filled with red-hot coals from the brazen altar. In his left hand, a cup overflowing with sweet, finely beaten incense. The linen binds his flesh, pulling tight across his chest as his heart hammers against his ribs. The heavy, 72-cord veil looms in front of him, a wall of thick fabric hiding a lethal, localized divinity. He takes a breath. He parts the curtain. He steps out of the light and into the perfect, windowless blackness. A silent man in burial clothes standing on the absolute edge of existence. But the plain white linen cannot protect him from the sheer, crushing weight of the presence inside that room. When he crosses the threshold and drops the incense onto the burning coals, what exactly is the sudden, violent cloud of smoke meant to hide him from? The heavy fabric of the veil falls shut behind his back, swallowing the morning sunlight. The air in the room is stale, heavy, and perfectly black. He is standing in the Holy of Holies. The only light in the windowless space is the dull, red glow of the coals, radiating from the golden censer in his right hand. Somewhere in the dark ahead of him sits a solid gold box. The Ark of the Covenant. He cannot see it. He cannot look for it. If he looks upon the localized presence resting between the sculpted cherubim, his heart will stop. Leviticus chapter 16, verses 12 and 13 in the King James. And he shall take a censer full of burning coals, of fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. Stop right there. That he die not. The phrase repeats. Sit with that. We are conditioned to read incense as a symbol, a sweet aroma, a metaphor for the prayers of the saints rising to heaven. The text does not say that. The text says the incense is a survival mechanism. It is a physical, chemical shield. He dumps the crushed powder from his left hand onto the glowing coals. The reaction is violent and instantaneous. A thick, choking cloud of white smoke erupts in the unventilated room. Watch what the text does. The Hebrew word used for this smoke is anan. It is the exact same word used in Exodus 19 to describe the dark, terrifying storm cloud that descended on Mount Sinai when Yahweh touched the peak. Same presence, same danger. The high priest is effectively commanded to recreate the blinding, lethal storm of Sinai inside a 10 by 10 foot tent so that he does not die. Tractate Yoma records a bitter, centuries-long argument over this exact moment. The Sadducees fought the Pharisees over when the fire should meet the powder. The Sadducees demanded the high priest light the incense outside the veil so he could walk in already hidden by the smoke. It was a play for safety. But the Pharisees insisted on a strict, terrifying reading of Leviticus 16:13. He shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord. Inside the room, I offer this rabbinic debate, not as doctrine, but to show you the absolute terror of the men who lived this text. The Pharisees won the argument, and that meant the high priest had to stand in the room, totally exposed to the mercy seat. For the 3 agonizing seconds it took to pour the powder and wait for the cloud to rise. Picture it. He is breathing shallowly in the blinding white fog. The smoke covers the gold. It creates a physical blindfold, separating the corrupted flesh of the man from the unshielded glory of the divine. The censer has done its job. He is alive. But surviving the entry is only the prerequisite. The smoke only buys him time to perform the actual work of the day. The man in the burial clothes must now reach blindly into the cloud with the blood of a slaughtered bull. The censer is burning, but the geography of this room is holding a much older memory. The space behind the veil is not just a dark tent in the desert. It is a mirror of a garden we were exiled from long ago. Why does the blood have to be flicked exactly 7 times toward the east? The white smoke of the censer is burning his eyes, thick and suffocating in the unventilated room. He is completely blind inside the cloud, listening to the terrified hammering of his own heart. Somewhere in the blinding fog, directly in front of him, rests the solid gold lid of the ark. He reaches back through the heavy curtain to receive a bowl from an attendant. The warm blood of the slaughtered bull. He cannot see the gold, so he navigates by memory and spatial awareness. He dips his finger into the dark liquid. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 14, in the King James. And he shall take of the blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat eastward. And before the mercy seat shall he sprinkle of the blood with his finger 7 times. Stop right there. Eastward. Read that again. The text is obsessively specific about direction. He doesn't just flick the blood onto the gold. He must direct it eastward. Why does a compass heading matter inside a pitch-black 10 by 10 foot windowless room? To understand the geography of this dark tent, you have to look at the oldest map in the biblical text. Go back to the book of Genesis. When the first human rebellion fractures the world, Adam and Eve are exiled from the localized presence of Yahweh. Watch what the text does in Genesis 3:24. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. Same cherubim, same lethal boundary. Mankind was driven east into the dirt and the thorns. For centuries, humanity has been moving east, away from the source of life. I offer this as the deliberate, cosmic architecture of the Torah. The tabernacle is a micro-Eden, and the high priest is the one man permitted to turn around and walk west. See the scene? When he passes through the heavy, cherubim-embroidered veil, he is walking backward through the flaming sword. He is crossing the boundary of the exile. But he cannot stay. He is a contaminated man, standing in a pure space. The blood he carries is not a magic spell. It is a biological decontamination. Life poured out to scrub the localized presence of the divine from the taint of human rebellion. He flicks the blood with his finger in the dark. 1 time up, 7 times down. Perfect completion. A rhythmic, desperate splashing of red against gold in the blinding white smoke. The blood hits the mercy seat eastward, facing the exact direction of the exiled camp, bridging the gap between the garden and the wasteland. He is buying another year of survival for the nation. When the bowl is empty, he does not turn his back on the presence. He walks backward. He slips through the heavy cords of the veil, leaving the censer smoking in the dark. He survived. The camp exhales. But the day is not over. The blood in the dark has scrubbed the sanctuary. But the actual weight of the rebellion, the psychological and spiritual guilt of the nation, is still heavy on the camp. It has to be physically removed. It has to be carried away. The man in the linen shroud steps back out into the blistering desert sun, where 2 goats are waiting for him at the door of the tent. 1 goat will bleed for Yahweh, but who is the 2nd goat for? The high priest steps back through the veil. He leaves the smoking censer in the dark, slipping past the 72 cords of heavy fabric, and walks out into the blinding midday sun of the courtyard. The camp is waiting in breathless silence. The man in the blood-spattered linen shroud approaches the door of the tabernacle. 2 identical goats are tethered in the dust. Picture it. 2 animals, indistinguishable from one another. Same size, same color, same age. A wooden urn rests between them, The high priest reaches both hands inside and draws out 2 lots. One lot will dictate blood, the other will dictate exile. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 8 in the King James. And Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the scapegoat. Stop right there. The scapegoat. Read that again. For centuries, Western readers have been taught that this word is a description of an action. The goat that escapes. An English translation popularized in the 1500s, but that is not what the Hebrew text says. Turn the English back into the ancient language it was translated from, and the illusion shatters. The Hebrew phrasing is a perfect, mirrored parallel. Gorel echad la Yahweh, ve gorel echad la Azazel. One lot for Yahweh, one lot for Azazel. Watch what the text does. It sets up a one-to-one equivalence. If the first lot designates a personal, specific name Yahweh, then the second lot must also designate a personal, specific name. Azazel is not a verb. Azazel is not an event. It is an identity. Same grammar, same structure. 2 lots, 2 goats, 2 destinies. A goat for the God of Israel and a goat for Azazel. Sit with that. The holiest day of the biblical calendar requires an interaction with a named entity that is not the Lord. The high priest slaughters the first goat, taking its blood into the blinding smoke of the holy place to scrub the tabernacle. But the second goat is kept alive. The man in the burial clothes walks over to the surviving animal. He presses both of his heavy, trembling hands violently onto the goat's head. He speaks aloud the iniquities, the transgressions, and the dark rebellion of the entire nation. He transfers the invisible, crushing weight of their sin onto the physical body of the beast. Then he hands the rope to an appointed man, and that man leads the goat away from the camp, out into the barren, scorched earth of the deep wilderness. Why? Why send the sin back into the wasteland? The canon of Scripture tells us what the priest did, but it deliberately leaves the name Azazel hanging in the dry desert air, unexplained. Leviticus assumes you already know who is out there. It assumes you know exactly why the wilderness is the only place the rebellion can be returned to. 1 goat bleeds to scrub the sanctuary clean, but the second goat carries the darkness away into the desolate sands. The Torah leaves the destination in the shadows, but an older text remembers exactly who is chained. In the rock, waiting for this payment, who is the fallen watcher buried beneath the desert? The appointed man walks the second goat away from the mountain, the dust of the Sinai desert rising around their feet. The noise of the millions in the Israelite camp fades into the dry wind. They are heading into the deep wasteland, a place of thirst and jagged stone. The canonical text tells us what the goat carries. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 21, in the King James. And Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat, and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions in all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send him away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. Stop right there. The goat carries the rebellion. But it is not just wandering aimlessly. It is walking toward Azazel. To the modern reader, the destination is a mystery. But to the ancient Jewish mind, it was history. There is a text that predates the New Testament, preserved whole for centuries inside the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. 1 Enoch. I offer it as that, one tradition's record, a lens into the exact theology of the men who lived this desert ritual. 1 Enoch chapter 8 reveals Azazel as a person, the leader of the fallen watchers. He is the entity who broke the boundaries of heaven, descended to earth, and taught mankind the brutal art of war. He taught humanity how to forge the sword, the knife, the shield, and the breastplate. He taught them the shedding of blood. Sit with that. Before Azazel, Humanity fell in the garden, but after Azazel, humanity learned to slaughter each other. The corruption was systemic, and the earth cried out from the violence. So when Yahweh judged this ancient rebellion, he commanded the archangel Raphael to bind the fallen watcher hand and foot. Watch what 1 Enoch, chapter 10 commands. Cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudale, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever. Read that again. The desert of Dudale. Rough and jagged rocks, total darkness. Same desert, same darkness. 1 Enoch maps exactly onto Leviticus. The high priest is not sending the goat out to randomly wander the dunes. He is executing a cosmic return of property. The violence, the bloodshed, the dark rebellion of Israel, it is all pressed onto the head of the goat. And the animal walks it directly back to the entity who introduced it to humanity in the first place. Return to sender. Tractate Yoma records the terrifying end of this journey. The appointed man did not simply let the goat loose to graze. He led it out to a sheer, jagged cliff in the wilderness and pushed it backward over the edge. It shattered on the rocks below, ensuring the sin could never walk back into the camp. Same jagged rocks, same barren prison. Two halves of one massive, bloody mechanism. Inside the camp, behind the heavy veil, the blood of the bull scrubs the holy room clean. So, the presence of God does not kill the priests. Outside the camp, the goat carries the curse back to the cursed. But a mechanism is just a machine. It is a holding pattern designed to keep a contaminated people alive, year after exhausting year. The man in the burial shroud must repeat this terrifying walk every single autumn, until the day the system breaks. Because the heavy fabric of the veil was never meant to hang there forever. Who finally touched the 72 cords? And what happened when the darkness was killed by the light? For 1,500 years, the bloody mechanism grinds on. Generations of trembling men strip off their gold, wrap themselves in the plain white linen of the grave, and walk into the pitch-black room with a handful of burning coals. The heavy, 72-cord fabric of the veil holds the line, keeping the blast zone contained, keeping the contaminated camp alive, until a Friday afternoon outside the limestone walls of Jerusalem. Picture it. The sky over the city has gone unnaturally dark. On a Roman cross, a different execution is finishing. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verses 50 and 51 in the King James. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And, behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Stop right there. From the top to the bottom. Read that again. No human hands tore that curtain. Tradition tells us it was a handbreadth thick, so heavy it took hundreds of priests to maneuver it. It was ripped violently apart by the very presence it was designed to contain. Watch what the text does. The author of Hebrews reveals the cosmic key. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12. In the King James, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. Same ritual, completely different blood. The man on the cross is the final high priest, but he did not carry a golden censer of smoke to hide himself from the fire. He walked the dark rebellion of the world directly into the localized presence of Yahweh, and he absorbed the lethal collision in his own flesh. The quarantine is broken. Go back now to the room where this film began. The desert tabernacle, the smell of ozone, the bodies of Nadab and Abihu, the terrified father forbidden to weep, the perfect, windowless blackness of the Holy of Holies. You have read that history 100 times, but tonight, You know exactly what that heavy curtain was holding back. You know why the high priest had to dress like a corpse just to survive the floorboards. The barrier is completely destroyed. The dark room is flooded with light. But the mystery is not entirely closed, because while the inner room is open, the desert is still holding the rest. The jagged rocks of Dudael still cover the ancient darkness, and Azazel is still waiting in the wasteland for the final, consuming fire at the end of the age. I hold this as one reading, not the final word. A collision of canonical blood and ancient history. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word "watched" below. Subscribe to the channel, because we are pulling back the curtain on these forgotten texts every week. And send this to one person who loves the deep architecture of the Bible but has never heard the name spoken over the wilderness goat. The veil is torn, and you do not need the smoke to survive the presence anymore.